Those issues that are very critical in those issues that are very critical in understanding the subnational unit's involvement in international relations, identifying those characteristics, issue of legitimacy, issue of capability, issue of how to mobilize the resources, that these are critical issues that will inform the subnational unit to be involved in international diplomacy. The constructivists, believe in the issue of identity, the norms that are supposed to be projected by this subnational unit. And of course, we must not also neglect the fact that these subnational units are very, very important actors in one way or the other in modern day international relations. So I have made some argument here that the complex interdependence argue that states are increasingly reliant on each other economically, socially, and politically, which lead to cooperation and reduce the use of military force, which was the major focus of the realists. Now, the liberals, or the liberalism, also share the same commonalities with the complex interdependency theory, because the liberals are talking about the cooperative nature of the international system, harmony, and so on and so forth. That is not just about war, which the complex interdependence is based, quite different from what the realists are focusing on. Now, come to the methodology. We come to the methodology. I adopted here a comparative studies approach. Comparative in the sense that I'm looking at Taiwan, I'm looking at Nigeria, and of course, looking at the federal states and the unitary states. How these systems of government, have been able to operate or how they've been able to utilize paradiplomacy, in their approach. So I use comparative analysis, which of course, which is also descriptive, because I also adopted a qualitative method, conducting an elite in-depth interview. Now, let me explain this elite in-depth interview. I could not actually go one after the other to interview some of these elites. But what I did was to have a semi-structured questions sent to scholars, policymakers, both in Taiwan and in Nigeria, and special scholars in political science, international relations, history, and law, and civil society activists, to look at their views about subnational unity engagement in paradiplomacy. And of course, at the end, I was able to translate, or what we call translation, to look at the views of the academics, the views of those policymakers, and of course, the views of civil society activists, and be able to look the findings from all their views, their responses. I was able to now use it to do the analysis and so on. Now, based on the questions that I structured. Now, we look at the changing places of paradiplomacy. I wouldn't want us to waste time in this because it's a very detailed aspect. But this thing we call paradiplomacy started for many, many centuries. Italian city-states, that was how when it started, when they were engaged in international trade, diplomacy, and so on and so forth. Then later, at the end of the Second World War, those European cities, now begin to engage in people-to-people diplomacy as the foundation for peace in Europe. Then, of course, the 20th century is a very remarkable century. We saw the era of globalization, urbanization, and decentralization in the management of governmental affairs. So we saw that particular era. But I try to make this analysis by looking at three major phases. The period when paradiplomacy was about federal states, the federal system of government, how it started in the United States, Canada, Australia, and so on, those older federal systems. Then the second phase, in the 80s, we now begin to see attention of scholars being shifted to the issues of theoretical analysis of subnational entities' involvement in paradiplomacy. Then the third phase, the 90s and 2000, which we are still in up to now, scholars' interest begin to increase because they now begin to see that subnational units have a role to play in international diplomacy. So those are the three phases. But bringing down to Nigeria and Taiwan, the development of paradiplomacy in Nigeria and Taiwan. I looked at it from First Republic, 1960 to 1963, Second Republic, 1960 to 1975, when the military were in power. Then 1979 to 1983, the Second Republic in Nigeria. Then, of course, the present era we are. So we have had different phases in Nigeria whereby we begin to see the practice of paradiplomacy. In case of Taiwan, in 1951, you all know the history, how Taiwan broke out from the mainland, and formed and came to where it is today in 1949. In 1951, they saw the first visit of a New York governor to the Republic of China. Then subsequently, Taiwan-Japan Cultural Economic Association. In the 1980s, we saw, and 1990s, we saw the period of very intense diplomatic or paradiplomatic activity between United States and Taiwan. Then, of course, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Taiwan had been very, very much engaged in ensuring that Taiwan, becomes a very major actor in the international system. So from 1986, we begin to see most of the American state governors coming to visit Taiwan. They are establishing trade relations and so on and so forth. Now, it is important also in this presentation to look at Nigerian-Taiwan diplomatic relations, the pre-United Nations General Assembly resolution and the post-United Nations General Assembly resolutions. Nigeria got independent in 1960, which of course Taiwan had been, the Republic of China had been existing. And one of the things that took place was the involvement. The World Bank invited the Taiwanese, very good scientists, to come and head our power station, our electricity station at that particular time. And he held that position as the general manager of our electricity station, corporation, as it was called at that time, from 1960 to 1964. And that was a very good relationship between Nigeria and the Republic of China at that time. The Civil War broke out in 1967, and that ended that relationship, so to say. Then in 1990, well, before the 1990, 1971, when the UN General Assembly resolution was passed, of course, Nigeria had no choice than to support China. Ironically, China was against Nigeria during the Civil War. China, the Republic of China, the People's Republic of China, did not support Nigeria during the Civil War. But Nigeria, after the UN resolution of 1971, in a very pragmatic, diplomatic way, decided to recognize the People's Republic of China. And I will, draw our attention to the major reasons for that action taken by Nigeria at that particular time. I will discuss that later. Now, in 1990, under the military regime, the military took a very strict action by recognizing the need to establish trade relationship with China, Taiwan. So in 1991, under the Babangida's administration, a trade relationship was established and a trade office was opened in Nigeria and also in Taiwan. And in 1993, a consulate was also established in Calabar. Calabar is also a state. We call it Cross River State in Nigeria. They opened exports processing zone in Calabar at that time. So Taiwan opened a consulate, have a consulate general in Calabar. Unfortunately, after 4 years, it was not active, so they closed it down. Now, in 2001, the trade mission office was now opened in Abuja. Abuja was now the seat of government. Abuja became the seat of government in 1991. So in 2001, the trade mission of Taiwan was opened in Abuja. And it was there for about 10 years. Now, something dramatic now happened in 2017. In 2017, with the visit of China's foreign affairs minister in Nigeria, and giving Nigeria the kind of condition for Nigeria to benefit from the $40 billion juicy development investment. So the Chinese foreign affairs minister ordered that China's trade office should be relocated or should be closed down. And when the Nigerian government took that action, China was very happy. But the government was also applied wisdom and said, no, we did not ask Taiwan to close its mission. We only asked Taiwan to move back to Lagos, which is the commercial news center of Nigeria, so that they will not begin to bask in euphoria. Oh, Nigeria has closed diplomatic relations with China, with Taiwan. So that was what the Nigerian government did. Now, the People's Republic of China has been able to leverage on its economic strength to buy so many friends in Africa. And Nigeria did not want to be left behind. So I want to invite this my study. I decided to look at the China factor in Nigeria-Taiwan relationship. From decades of relationship between Nigeria and Taiwan, it is important for us to reflect on the reason why Nigeria decided to shift to Taiwan to China instead of Taiwan. As I've mentioned earlier, the 1971 United Nations resolution, one China policy, which successive Nigerian government has also maintained in their foreign policy program, because they believe that China share almost the same foreign policy principle. And that is the same way the most Africans also believe, that China believe in the principle of non-interference, which is the basic principle in international law, the principle of peaceful coexistence, which is also what we subscribe as a member of the United Nations. And Nigeria believe that China, the People's Republic of China, share the same foreign policy principle. And for that reason, decided that China should be its close ally instead of sticking to Taiwan. And the Civil War experience, Nigeria fought a civil war, which was a secessionist war. And looking at China and Taiwan, they believe that Taiwan also is a secessionist, and therefore did not want to support a secessionist government. And the argument, and reasonable argument, is that if they support Taiwan as a secessionist government, if any of the groups agitating for secession in Nigeria, China is likely to support that group. So Nigeria, in their own conventional wisdom, decided that they should support People's Republic of China, that has faced that same kind of problem. The issue of national question, which is a nagging issue in Nigerian political process, has continued to also be an issue that Nigeria did not want to support Taiwan. because the issue of national question is also aligned with the issue of secessionism, which Nigerian has been battling with for many years, right from 1967 up to now. We have not come out from that problem. So those centrifugal forces, as we talk about in, those centrifugal forces, as we have mentioned, continue to play along, to be a problem that Nigeria decided not to support Taiwan. And so on, the issue of Pan-Africanism, the issue of the China-African Forum, which Nigeria did not want to be left behind. Now, the data analysis, I'm almost rounding up. From the first question I raised, why do subnational units or governments in Nigeria and Taiwan not deeply involved in paradiplomacy? My findings reveal that because of high centralization in foreign policy making, it is very difficult for those subnational units to actually be in the forefront in foreign policy making and also in foreign diplomacy. And the constitutional constraints, the Constitution does not allow the subnational government in Nigeria to be involved deeply in foreign policy and foreign external relations. Then, of course, in case of Taiwan, as a unitary state, we all know very well that unitary states centralized decision-making process. And Taiwan will not want the subnational unit to have such kind of latitude to begin to engage in foreign diplomacy because there is this fear of fragmentation, or this fear of having diverse foreign policy issues. And so they did not want to have that kind of, give the subnational units that kind of opportunity. Then, of course, the bureaucratic process and limitations, the capacity of these subnational units to be engaged in foreign diplomacy. So from the studies here, I discovered that 90% of them in Nigeria believe that the central government will not allow the subnational unit to have that kind of push. Then in China and Taiwan, rather, 85%, and so on and so forth. Now, what are the factors that can favor the growth of paradiplomacy? We talk about decentralization, we talk about democratization, we talk about federalization. These three concepts or issues are interwoven. Decentralization is associated with federalism. And democratization, which is important because if you democratize the foreign policy making process, it will allow the subnational units the opportunity to be involved in foreign diplomacy. Then, of course, decentralization is very, very important for federal system. But in the case of unitary system, for highly decentralized unitary system of government, foreign policy can also be given to the subnational unit, like I've mentioned, China using the provinces, the British, for instance, using the units, to be involved in paradiplomacy and so on. Now, for economic reasons, these are some of the motivating factors for the growth of paradiplomacy. Cultural exchanges. Culture is a soft power mechanism in international diplomacy. And Taiwan and Nigeria, they have very rich cultural system, so which they can leverage on to ensure that the subnational units are involved in paradiplomacy. Then, of course, talk about globalization, talk about the involvement of the NGOs, the civil society groups, and so on. In Nigeria, we are not deeply involved. The civil society are not very much involved in paradiplomacy or in foreign policy issues. But in Taiwan, I realize that their civil society are very active. Of course, you must understand the background to that because of the nature of the system. So they are very, very much involved in external issues or foreign relations issues. Now, are there legal or institutional constraints for subnational? Of course, there are. I've mentioned earlier, the Vienna Convention of Law of Treaties allow only the central government the opportunity or the power to enter into diplomatic relations. Also, Nigerian federal system does not allow the subnational unit the opportunity or that responsibility to engage in foreign diplomacy. But in the case of Taiwan, by inference, the unitary system controls, the central government controls the decision-making process, and therefore it is important for those subnational units not to be so much involved in para-diplomacy. And that explains why we see that Taiwan as an entity engaged with the states, the United States, not those subnational units like Taipei, Kaohsiung, Taichung, and so on. They are not the one engaging with those states. But argument I'm trying to make here, the possibility of Nigerian states, the subnational units of Nigeria and subnational units of Taiwan engaging in diplomatic relations. And that is the only way, very pragmatic way, Taiwan will free itself from this international isolationism and invariably begin to gain recognition. So that is the argument I'm trying to make in this research. Now, how do you evaluate? The issue evaluation of the engagement of subnational units in para-diplomacy, we can look at it from the opportunities that are found and the challenges, which, of course, in the course of this presentation, I've mentioned some of those challenges. The challenges in terms of fear, the challenge in terms of capacity of these subnational units being involved in, in foreign diplomacy. Do they have the personnel, the bureaucratic acumen to engage in such para-diplomatic activities? So we can look at it, but the opportunities are there. Now, engaging in para-diplomacy, the involvement of this subnational unit, both in Nigeria and in Taiwan, will give the great opportunity of these units, these entities, to interface with other subnational units in anywhere, and of course, in particular, in Taiwan. So these are the issues. Now, let me, the tentative, I've mentioned these findings are tentative findings because the work is still in progress. It's not a conclusive work. But what I have said here is that para-diplomacy can serve many different purposes, including economic development, cultural diffusion, technological advancement, political affirmation. In this context, developing capacity for acting abroad may serve various interests in the long term. Secondly, para-diplomacy presents both potential opportunities and pitfalls, like I've mentioned before, for democratic development, an issue particularly crucial for many regions in developing countries. So it is very, very important that we point out some of those challenges that are also likely to confront those subnational units, when they engage in para-diplomacy. Then thirdly, despite the complicated relationship that exists between Nigeria and, that are likely, because of Nigerian position on one China policy, Taiwan can build really diplomatic ties with Nigeria through its link with the subnational governments in that country, bringing it closer to Taiwan and, of course, to achieve its objectives. Those are the findings that we can just bring out. Then, of course, conclusion. Well, I cannot conclude because the work is still in progress. Yeah, but tentatively, what we have said is that para-diplomacy is a better approach in view of what Taiwan is, is being confronted with, international isolationism and the need for recognition. So when those subnational units in Nigeria begin to interact with subnational units in Taiwan, that will give those entities, those units, the opportunity to begin to relate very, very well. And that will pave way for good recognition of Taiwan. Thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Otto, very much for the very comprehensive presentation. I'm sure there's probably lots of questions that people have, but we still have two more presentations first, and then we'll have a joint Q&A at the very end. The next speaker is Dr. Michael Ugweze.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon and kind greetings to everybody, including those online from wherever you are listening from. My name is Michael Ugweze, and then I'm here to present my work on mistrust and cross-strait provocations, implications of China's Vision 2035 hybrid strategy on Taiwan's national interests. I will make sure that I don't take up to an hour that, like my friend took, so that we can have more room for discussions. That's a very good one. By way of outline, I will just speak to 6 issues, beginning from introduction and then ending with conclusions. By way of introduction, this paper explored how the cross-strait provocations by China negatively impact Taiwan's national interests, increasing its potential risks, and then diminishing its economic opportunities around the world. Essentially, the Republic of China, Taiwan, existed as a sovereign state since 1949. But its statehood became increasingly contested when it lost its seat in the United Nations to the People's Republic of China through the UN Resolution 2758 in 1971. Since then, the cross-strait dispute has continued to gain momentum, gathering enormous academic attention in literature. And then, however, China's adoption of hybrid strategy in an attempt to actualize its unification plan, or what is called the Vision 2035, and then Taiwan's response mutation from its hitherto diversionary approach to a more confrontational one raise some pertinent questions. One is, what factors fuel the cross-strait tension and encourage mutation of strategies on the part of both China and Taiwan, making peaceful resolution difficult in the recent times? Second, how is China's hybrid approach to Taiwan question impacting the island's national interests? And then third, what options are available for resolving the political stalemate of the two entities without adversely jeopardizing the one China principle? These questions indeed form the fulcrum upon which our study revolves. By way of literature review, something that appeared critical in literature relating to the cross-strait tension, which defines the critical one-China rivalry that underpins the political relations between China and Taiwan since 1949, Arising from what we found in literature are some critical schools explaining what is at the root of the continued stalemate and what is responsible for why it has become very difficult to reach a compromise that will bring about stable cross-strait relations. Some of these issues, as I identified them in literature, include what I may call the school of thought relating to historical account that also coincided with the Cold War politics. And then the changing and politicization of the Taiwanese identity, which to China evokes some kind of Taiwanese nationalism. And then the Taiwan's geographic location and geopolitical contestation, which has made the island more or less a pawn to be used in Indo-Pacific and South China Sea games. Then the last one current in literature appears to be what some identify to be lack of commitment and then willingness to tolerate each other's position by both China and Taiwan across the crossroads. These are the critical schools that define what is at the root cause of the difficulty in resolving the Taiwan contested question. The historical school, for instance, believe that both KMT, which happened to be the party that eventually came to occupy Taiwan in 1949, and then the CPP that retained and stayed back in the mainland, led by Mao Zedong then, had two different ideological perspectives on how to organize the future of modern China. While KMT under Chiang Kai-shek believed that the modern China envisaged should be a kind of society formed along the Western development model and governance. That of CCP, which is Chinese Communist Party, led by Mao Zedong, believed that modern China should be organized along Marxism-Leninism with a touch of Chinese characteristics. So more of modified Marxism-Leninism that eventually came to be called Maoism at the time, which is still what is continuing up to today. Then for those who believe in the politicization, the changing identity of changing Taiwanese identity and the politicization thereof, these ones subscribed to the fact that the increasing Taiwanese identity being promoted in Taiwan appears to be undermining Chinese nationalism, and China is afraid that such identity building could evoke Taiwanese nationalism that will encourage breakup by future generations. So to them, this had to be nipped, and it is also responsible for why the crisis is escalating. For the Taiwan geographic location, of course, geography is a critical national power. And then Taiwan's location in the Indo-Pacific and the South China Sea in particular appears to be of critical importance to several actors. And then the interests of these actors, which appear to be at variance with China's interests, also happen to be responsible for why it is difficult to find a lasting solution to the problem. Then the lack of commitment, as already explained. In our own departure for this study, we looked at what we call what is at the center of all these crises that is also responsible for mutation of strategies by both China and Taiwan. Essentially, China has migrated more from its hitherto soft approach to now a hybrid approach. And that is where we connected our own discourse through mistrust thesis. So mistrust happened now to be the guiding lens upon which we conducted this investigation. Before 1970, both China and Taiwan used force as a strategy to reconcile the cross-strait question. However, after the US President Richard Nixon's visit to Beijing, an ambiguous framework emerged in the name of One China policy, which is also synonymously used in the current time with One China principle. And this policy was to subdue military tension around the Taiwan Strait, marking a new era of soft approach, of using soft approach in reconciling the cross-strait question, reconciling China-Taiwan political logjam. Despite this intervention, Taiwan's democratization in the 1980s and its subsequent drop of One China claim in 1991 created or further elongated the mistrust already existing, with China thinking that this approach will now, that Taiwan was moving towards a de jure independence. In order to douse the tension and to convince China that this wasn't necessarily the approach, the KMT, which was the party in power at that time, along with CPP also controlling China, entered into an agreement in 1992 that came to be recognized as the 1992 consensus. In that agreement, both applied to pledge to the one China principle. However, the existing mistrust still led them into having conflicting interpretation of the same document. Why China sees the 1992 consensus as part of, as an agreement by Taiwan that it is now part of China and the PRC is the only legitimate government. Taiwan also interprets the document as, yes, we agreed to one China principle, but we didn't state anywhere that this one China has its parent body as China, that is in Beijing, and not Taiwan. So that continued to explain the impasse between the two political entities. And then when such mistrust exists, studies have shown that at the existence of mistrust in any system, what it results, especially in political relations, is that it creates a sense of non-belonging. And once there is a sense of non-belonging, studies have associated with increased push for either radicalization or even separatism, which China is accusing Taiwan of today. Now, this is what we use to measure our discourse before we now get to the implications of the hybrid strategy on Taiwan's national interest. This hybrid strategy, like we stated, now appears to be a situation where China fuses soft approach with kinetic approach. Given that at a time it was kinetic approach, it couldn't bring the result. Then it resulted to soft approach in the 70s, which also couldn't bring the result. Beginning from 2016, and then peaking in 2022 after Nancy Pelosi's visit, China has increased its diplomatic isolation and then economic cohesion of Taiwan, significantly affecting its national interests in three main areas of national security, politics, and economy. Each of these has overlapping pressures on Taiwan's international standing. China utilizes several strategies in doing this, and essentially by combining soft approach with gray zone operation, as well as lawfare, cognitive warfare, economic cohesion, all designed to achieve its plan of reunifying Taiwan before 2035 without necessarily fighting. So China's hybrid approach is more or less a suffocating approach to actualize the same result without necessarily fighting. So it keys into Xi Jinping's foreign policy of getting his interests actualized without resorting to fight. So we measured this implication from 4 different prisms, beginning with China's gray zone operations. In fact, since 19th Congress of the Chinese Communist Party in October 2020, when it passed the East Vision 2035, there has been increased gray zone operations across the Taiwan Strait with several military flights, military drills, and Taiwan has also responded to this by conducting similar military drills. But the difference is that whereas China's military drills around Taiwan's territory, Taiwan's drill is within its own territory. So the implication of what this has done is that upon the national security, it evokes some kind of fear. And this fear that is evoked also raises uncertainty and then increases Taiwan's vulnerability. In politics, it widens the political divides across the elites, undermining the synergy necessary for reaching a comprehensive national security strategy. And this also drains economy, thereby limiting the space for investment and then raising panic even in advanced semiconductor supply chain globally. Then for the lawfare, China does not end at just the gray zone, the military drill. China also goes further into giving its legal interpretation, which is often described as conflation of the UN Resolution 2758 and then the One China principle. This conflation of China's appears to have linked these two, One China principle, to become a global consensus about the condition and the situation of China and Taiwan in the modern time. Taiwan also responds in its own manner, because one significant thing about Taiwan since 2016, when Tsai Ing-wen took over power, was this migration, this mutation of strategy, because hitherto they have been adopting what they call diversionary behavior. And then diversionary behavior in international relations is taken to be a feature of weak state, and designed not to appear as a weak state, as a strong state, is now mutated to a more confrontational approach, whereby it becomes eye for an eye and then tooth for tooth. Now, this also threatens Taiwan's de facto sovereignty and limits its international standing, such that between 2016 and 2024, Taiwan lost a number of diplomatic allies across the world, depleting from 22 now to about 12. And then this also limits, in the economic paradigm, it limits state to business collaboration and opportunities around the world, particularly in the global south, especially Africa. This is essential because China, for instance, leveraged its private companies across the world, particularly in Africa, and connected its foreign policy with these companies. But the way it is doing with the conflation of this principle and marketing it across the world creates very serious problem for Taiwan to leverage such opportunity to enter and see how it can utilize its foreign investors, its private enterprises across the world to connect its foreign policy and then reconnect with countries. So that's what this warfare has done to Taiwan and continues to do to it, with the aim of creating more diplomatic suffocation. Then in the cognitive warfare, China plays into the mind of Taiwanese, whereas it is playing into the mind of the global system. And then playing into the mind, it has also escalated its media propaganda and disinformation. And this has created some kind of fear in the minds of Taiwanese, such that while China is conducting its military drill, it is following through with presentation of Taiwan's defense and the forces in a bad light, casting it in a bad light to justify or to explain that it cannot protect Taiwanese in the event of war with China. And the current survey already conducted in the recent time by Center for Electoral Studies in the National Tsinghua University has shown that the more China conducts military drill and follows up with propaganda and disinformation, the more fear it creates in the mind of the people and the less confidence they have in their armed forces. The only mediating factor was the existence of American military conducting similar drills around the Taiwan Strait. That's the only thing that increases confidence. And by implication, it places Taiwan on a condition where it can be under some foreign influence. Again, at the political level, this thing has also resulted in what we call securitization of politics and election. Essentially, in the recent time, not so recent anyway, before around 2015, there was a statement credited to a leader of a particular political party in Taiwan, telling Taiwanese voters, the electorate, if you vote a certain political party, you will go to war with the mainland. But if you vote a certain other political party, you will not go to war with mainland. This appears to be a kind of propaganda to achieve electoral success, thereby securitizing what is now happening and having actors both within and outside Taiwan who could be espionaging for China or even making way for China's influence in Taiwan. In terms of its economic suffocation, what China has done is that it increases economic suffocation of Taiwan. And how does it increase such economic suffocation? It also explains why it will be very difficult for Taiwan government to connect its foreign businesses outside Taiwan and see how to leverage on such ones to conduct foreign policy or reconnect with countries. So China initiates certain kind of policies, programs, and agreements, not just internally, but often with more foreign countries, particularly the global south. And it is always in the global south, Africa inclusive, that Taiwan has its greatest challenge in terms of this business connection. Now, the implication is that it only increases the blockade of Taiwan and then threatens the very foundation of its economic security. And what we find is that even the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company appears to have become very much vulnerable, because when this thing is followed through, various countries are currently investing on semiconductor manufacturing, such that they are already foreseeing that in the event of global interruption of semiconductor supply by Taiwan on account of possible conflict with Taiwan, that the survival of the industrial automation and the AI and the Internet of Things could not be significantly affected. That has encouraged many investment in that area. So, and very interestingly too, the Taiwan response to this economic question also appears to have even dealt with its economic interests. Before 2022, China used to be the highest investment or trade, to have highest trade relation with Taiwan. But that has significantly dropped, forcing Taiwan to diversify its market. And unfortunately, China's program in Africa has sealed that economic environment against Taiwan. Therefore, it has resulted in the loss of virtually the two global largest markets, Chinese market and then the African market. Now, and the critical question remains, what is the way forward? Since we identify that what is at the center of all this is trust. We say trust because at any time there appears to be semblance of trust between China and Taiwan, there appears to be more robust diplomatic engagement even outside the country. And I will use one example to buttress this. One example was during the administration of Ma Ying-jeou between 2008 and then 2016. Taiwan and China enjoyed relative peace in terms of relative diplomatic relations. In fact, the period gave rise to several trade agreements and political relations, such that they entered into a more like a gentleman agreement, not officially documented, but that wherever you are already gaining your influence, we have entered into an agreement that we will not come there. And that explains why even when the Gambia in Africa wanted to enter into a relationship with China, China wasn't so open to welcoming such relationship. But in exchange, Yahya Jammeh then cut a relationship with Taiwan in 2013, and yet not entering into a relationship with China because the room was not open. However, in 2016, when Taiwan came in, and then appears to be pushing more for independence or for more autonomy for Taiwan, what China did was to open up that space for the Gambia, and then they cemented the relationship. And then from that period up to 2024, they lost several other countries in Africa, including Burkina Faso. Now, we argue that it is by, we say that building trust will help is the only way forward. Since the trust will be responsible for why even the paradiplomacy we are talking about will have to be accepted to operate at a certain level. Essentially, if there is no robust, peaceful cross-strait relation, it will continue to affect the relations of Taiwan with other foreign countries moving forward. And we say to build this trust, there is the need to create and institutionalize cross-strait dialogue committees by both entities. For Taiwan, Taiwan is in a special condition here. The special condition in that its own mistrust is bifurcated. At the domestic level, there is mistrust that also divides the elites. At the international level, there is mistrust between China and then Taiwan. Although such thing may also obtain in Taiwan with regard to how Xi Jinping organizes the CCP currently. But at least for Taiwan, we suggest that it can resolve its own division by convoking periodic inter-party and civil society dialogue. This dialogue should include both the civil society group, student bodies, intelligentsias, politicians drawn from across political parties, and then government. Periodic communication will help to bridge the mistrust existing between them and then enable them to form a concerted effort at the global level, especially in relation with China. Then China should also keep an open mind, including by encouraging the space for a negotiated Taiwan's independence. We suggested this because in the event of crisis, in the event of war, both China and Taiwan will suffer heavily. None will necessarily achieve its intended objectives across the Taiwan Strait using force. And then we conclude by arguing that although neither China nor Taiwan stands the chance of achieving their desired objectives across the Taiwan Strait using force, China's hybrid approach leaves Taiwan more vulnerable in the areas of its national security, politics, and economy, leading to increased diplomatic suffocation that is aimed at forcing Taiwan into China's reunification agenda. Why this is very important, we stated that none could achieve this objective in the event that there is war with China, which most likely will not be. If there is such war, China will be affected at three fronts. One is that the war will enter into a war of attrition. No country, however strong you are, survives war of attrition. But for war of attrition to remain, Taiwanese must be dedicated to defending their country. But because of geopolitical interests around Taiwan, because the issue of Taiwan Strait is no longer a single case problem, it's a multi-layered problem. The case of Taiwan, whether the citizens are indeed interested at defending Taiwan, certain vested interests will draw other global actors in ensuring this elongation to see how to use it to curb the rising influence of China and then ensure that there is smooth cross-strait, smooth sail around the Taiwan Strait. And yet, such war will not be used to advocate Taiwanese independence. Therefore, for Taiwan to gain independence or for a lasting solution to be found around the cross-strait, it has to be the business of China and Taiwan. Thank you for listening.
Right. Thank you very much for that proposal and for the time as well. Also, for those of you who haven't noticed, there are also some snacks in the back of the room, so please feel free to take some as well. We also have coffee, tea, and a hot water machine. I'd now like to introduce our third speaker, who maybe wants to start after people come back with their coffee and snacks. Dr. Akachuku Ume. Scroll down. Scroll up.
Good day, everyone. My name I remain my humble self, Akachuku Ume. For those of you who are watching us from online, good to have you guys here. But I promise not to take more of your time. And for want of time, I will be quite fast and quick. Some of the things that part of my work is also being covered by the former two presenters. So, and here we go. So the topic of my work, this is a work in progress, so to speak. It has not been concluded yet. It's still on the surface level. And I'm looking at an African perspective on the China-USA quest for maximum influence and control of Taiwan. And for want of emphasis, I think we should also look into this fact that whenever Taiwan is being mentioned, the first thing that comes to mind is China, US, and it seems just like the previous speaker made mention of the fact that in one of his own analogy, that Taiwan presents itself as a pawn in the chessboard of geopolitical games that is being played in the international arena. For the want of time, and also the outline of my work, these are the outline of my work: introduction, framework of analysis, historical background, evolving dynamic competing goals, Africa's stake and implications, and a concluding remark. An introduction: the intricate geopolitical dance surrounding Taiwan with China and the US vying for influence and control is a complex narrative that resonates far beyond East Asia. And in these complexities, also African nation find itself in a position of trying to how to navigate its own part in the global arena. And the Taiwan situation presents a confluence of historical context, both economic interest, diplomatic strategy that demands attention. In the analysis, I'm looking at the realism school of thought, which underpins this work itself. And while China's role and place in Africa has garnered a lot of scholarly attention, both to its praise and condemnation, not much has been written when it comes to issues of Taiwan regarding its role in Africa as a game player. And it interests you to know that Africa is not just a continent. Africa is a continent made up of 55 nations. So irrespective of the fact that some Western game play has kind of trying to relegate Africa behind the scene, you cannot relegate Africa, so to speak, more especially when it comes to issues of Taiwan. Historical background. Chinese Empire in the 17th century, there was a lot that happened then, and at the time, Japanese invasion of Taiwan in 1895 severed Taiwan from the mainland China. And also the Nationalist Party, which is led by Chiang Kai-shek in 1945, led to fight that when they lost the power, when they lost the civil war to Chinese Communist Party, Chiang Kai-shek with his nationalist loyalists moved down to Taiwan, and that's where I called it Chiang's forces and Mao Communist Party. The communist victory in 1949 led to to the Republic of China of today that we are talking about. And that is how the name Taiwan, and the name Taiwan has retained. The Chinese Communist Party points to this history to claim Taiwan, but the Taiwanese points to the same history to argue that they were not part of the modern Chinese state that was first formed after the revolution in 1911, or the People's Republic of China that was established under Mao in 1949. Today, only 12 countries plus Vatican, which is one of the most strongest, officially recognizes Taiwan. The US decision to switch diplomatic recognition from Taipei to Beijing in 1979 was the turning point, and the richer, more powerful China exerts pressure so more countries do not recognize Taiwan or lend its support. But America remains the island's strongest ally, sells arms to it, and has vowed to help in case of a Chinese attack. And it also interests us to note that the kind of ambiguity policy that America has instituted on China is quite complicating. Though the kind of game that America has been playing in its own geopolitical settings, so to speak. For example, between 1960 and 1963, Taiwan garnered a lot of recognition from African continent. About almost 12 countries out of 23 as at then recognized Taiwan. And also, until 1971, when the issues of the United Nations 2758 resolution was passed, and China replaced Republic of China, which is Taiwan, in the United Nations. Not until 1979, when America, all of a sudden, also transferred the recognition, diplomatic recognition to People's Republic of China as the official representatives of the China. So you see that America has always been there from day one when it comes to issues of China. And looking at the issue and the position of China, Taiwan, what we also come to mind is why is China and America so vested in this Formosa island called Taiwan? Why the need to control Taiwan? And I'm looking at some reasons, being that Taiwan's location makes it a flashpoint for competing interests. For the People's Republic of China, getting control of Taiwan would lead to achievement of reunification. And to US, getting control over Taiwan will help to contain China. For People's PRC, the position and the location of Taiwan is very strategic, meaning that this is from Taiwan that it gained access to the Pacific Ocean. And for America, it is strategic and has a geopolitical importance in the sense that America has formed the policy of the free island chain that comprises of Japan, Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines. So America wants to use that to contain China. And the rise of China, we all know that America is not finding it funny, the way China has been rising. And also, significantly, the significant trade link that cut across the island of Taiwan is also of significance to mainland China, as well as America, which has a concern about permanent shift of economic tide with regards to TSMC, which produces over 90% of the world advanced microchips. And also, the history of Mao Zedong for PRC, and also the history for Chiang Kai-shek of Taiwan. This is something that is so personal that sometimes when you look at international games and how it is being played, has some effect. And also the last, which is not the least, is the ideology. For China, for PRC, the one-party and socialist market economy that it espouses is very, very important to it. And to America, the democracy and the capitalism that they're exporting to the rest of the world is also quite important to it. So these are some of the reasons and the strategic reasons why there is competition for control of Taiwan. Then, as we are talking about Africa, let's take a look at Taiwan's conduct and the position in the history past. When we take a look at apartheid system in South Africa, apartheid government of the Nationalist Party in South Africa, Taiwan has been a staunch supporter of Nationalist Party NP in South Africa, that it's really one of the strongest supporters of apartheid system in South Africa. And South Africa has a very a dicey case when it comes to issues of Taiwan. Because of recently, there was a brouhaha, diplomatic brouhaha, when South Africa issued a notification that Taiwan should move their trade office in Pretoria to somewhere else. And to my heart, I feel somehow concerned, because that particular trade office where I got my visa that brought me here to Taiwan. But at the same time, when we look into the history of what Taiwan did in the past, when it comes to, remember that when we speak of apartheid system is a system of white domination in South Africa. And as an African, we know what that portends to Africans and what it means, you know. So anyone that supports white domination in Africa, it sends a shockwave in the mind of an average African. Is it the same people that find themselves in this condition that they're trying to have their own independence? But when it was favorable to them, instead of them to support the minority, so to not the minority, but because the blacks in South Africa were the majority, but they lack the power, the political power. And so it's something that calls for a bit of reflection, also argument. And also the case of Nigerian Biafran Civil War, which also Professor Otto has also briefly touched on, which I will not dwell much on it, where Taiwan was also supporting Nigerian state, whereas the mainland China was also not supporting Nigerian state, but in a way, we say de facto supporting Biafran side. And remember that the Biafran side is a secessionist group. And how did China support the Biafran? Not that they were giving them arms or in any other form, but it was more or less propaganda machine through media and the radio coverage that it was trying to. But however, what really happened at the end of the day, Nigeria voted for China to take a seat at the United Nations Security Council. Then the last one, but not the least, presently in Kingdom of Eswatini, Taiwan prides itself as a beacon of democracy, the biggest democracy in South East Asia. And with what is happening in the Kingdom of Eswatini, it's obvious, we knew what is going on there. For those who are not aware of what is happening in Eswatini, there has been a massive repression for citizens that have been clamoring for democracy in Eswatini. And the Kingdom of Eswatini is a monarchy that is ruled by the royal family. But the people are saying, no, I think this we've had enough, that we should embrace a democracy, so to speak. So imagine the irony of Taiwan that tried itself as the biggest democracy in Southeast Asia. But the only country that they have a diplomatic relationship with in Africa, which is Eswatini, they are not trying to even influence, not that they were trying to say that Taiwan should impose its democratic values to Kingdom of Eswatini, but at least what is it doing in terms of being pragmatic in how things are being handled? It also interests you most that when I was here, there was a conference that was organized in NCCU that a professor from Eswatini was present. When he was making a comment, he said it's unfortunate that the theme of the conference was democracy, but it's unfortunate that the Taiwan that is espousing democratic principles is turning a blind eye, turning the other way around when it comes to issues of what is happening in Eswatini. And when it comes to issues of Africa's stake and impact of China's US struggle over Taiwan, as the China-US power struggle over Taiwan intensifies, African nations find themselves at a crossroad. The conflict's ripple effect can impact African trade and investment, potentially shaping economic relations with both global powerhouses. A conflict between Taiwan and China could have a significant impact on African trade and investment, especially for countries that rely on exporting raw material to Asia. And you all know that most African nations are raw material exports is the mainstream of their economy. In terms of trade, the Taiwan trade the Taiwan Strait is a critical route for African countries that export raw material to Asia, especially China. For example, the Democratic Republic of the Congo ships nearly 60% of its global exports through the strait, and almost all of it is destined for China. You know, when we talk about the position and the location of Taiwan, there are three straits that surround Taiwan. The Taiwan Strait, which is at the western part, west of Taiwan, and also the Yamakuze Strait, which is separating that runs through Japanese islands and Taiwan in the north, and also the Bashi Strait in the south that runs through between Philippines and the Taiwan. And when you look into it and you couple with the American policy of a free island chain, you can now see more reason why China at the competition for control of that strait is quite important. For America is to project power in Southeast Asia and towards China, and also to contain China. And for China, that is the gateway to the Pacific, for them to have access to Pacific and also to project their own influence. In foreign investment, a conflict could lead to a decrease in foreign direct investment from China and Taiwan, which are both major investors in the region. In terms of trade, African oil and resources exporters could face deteriorating terms of trade if China's economy rebalances away from investment towards consumption. This will reduce the demand for commodities. In terms of market reactions, market may react in advance of any physical disruption or shortages. For example, hedge funds could sell off their China and Taiwan exposure, and the multinational corporations with dependencies in China could see a market sell-off. In areas of strategic and economic implication for African nations in the power play, African nations faces strategic implications in navigating the China-USA power struggle over Taiwan. In balancing economic interest, diplomatic ties, and regional stability, African countries must carefully assess their stance in these high stakes of influence. In as much as from the preceding chapters of this slide, when we talked about the three nations Taiwan finds itself in, the role it played. We also not forget the role Taiwan has also played when it comes to Liberia, the Gambia, and also Burkina Faso. Taiwan has been doing a great job in agricultural and technical training, as well as assistance, and also aid. And this was one of the reasons why in the 1960s and the 60s, 70s, and 80s, Taiwan was quite present in Africa, and what is usually known as dollar diplomacy that was being used by Taiwan. Economic implication. The Taiwan situation presents African nations with both trade opportunities and risk. From potential market disruption to new economic partnerships, African economies must evaluate the economic implications of the conflict on their trade landscape. Investment flows. Amidst the Taiwan debate, investment flows and financial partnership in Africa may see shift and realignment. Understanding the economic undercurrent of the conflict is crucial for African nations to navigate the evolving investment landscape. Diplomatic strategy and alliances in the Taiwan dispute. In the Taiwan dispute, African nations must carefully position themselves and navigate diplomatic relations with both China and the US, balancing international relationship and the partnership with the regional interest. African countries plays a crucial role in shaping diplomatic strategies. Greater trade and investment are critical in Africa, or rising unemployment will stoke more social and political tensions, leading to violent unrest. Unfortunately, Africa remains marginalized from the global economy, representing just 3% of the world trade. African leaders in both government and businesses recognize the importance of the US market, the sectorial leadership of many US companies, and the high standard of US businesses, especially compared with the poor transparency and the environmental record of many Chinese companies. And this is where we look into. I remember sometimes during the course of my interview when I was going around Taiwan, most scholars, even officials, when you speak to them, they will always say that the Chinese economic power muscle, that Taiwan cannot compete with Chinese economic power, and that's the reason why they find themselves where they are today. But I think I also this study also begs to differ in that respect, because in as much as China has the bigger economic muscle, Taiwan also has a role to play in terms of being pragmatic. For example, the southbound policy that is being adopted by Taiwan by the past administration, and I know that this current administration will also take it forward. It's unfortunate that in that southbound policy, it is quite limiting. It is quite limiting in the sense that when you look at that policy document itself, it comprises mostly Asian, Southern Asian countries, and also some part of Pacific. It is so limiting in the sense that in African engagement, I think there is a need for expansion of that southbound policy. In other words, there should be a need to expand that southbound policy to be inclusive of the so-called the global south. And in that global south is where Africa comes in. I'm also aware of engagement of Taiwan in Somaliland and what they are doing there. And but in official documents, we know that there are some diplomatic issues and obstacles that might also lead to what inhibits Taiwan from engaging. But that is where pragmatism comes into play when Taiwan looks into it and see how it can do about it. I want to explore. So lesson on self-determination. Africa is a continent that have grappled with so many ill wills that has been experienced from the West. The negatives of colonialism, imperialism, and new colonialism. And I would think that Taiwan should learn a thing or two from the experience of what Africa has undergone, passed through, in the struggle for self-determination. And also, when we look at the importance of asserting independence in the face of external influences, Taiwan should also look into it and see what they can do and terms of being pragmatic. Because these are the phases that we also pass through. Then the adoption of United Nations Charter on Self-Determination is quite ambiguous. A case in mind is what is currently happening in Western Sahara. Somaliland, with an exception of South Sudan. In United Nations Charter of Self-Determination, it is not explicit on how to go about it. And that is where demand for pragmatism comes into play. And also the US complicated power game play in geopolitics. It's quite complex in the sense that even when we look at Taiwan, the gameplay America played with Chiang Kai-shek and all of a sudden turning 360 to recognize mainland China is something that also calls into mind that Taiwan should also be careful of how he played his own game. And also independence for Africans is a complex and contested concept. It's unacceptable to see an oppressor as a mentor. And also the expansion of the new sound-bound policy that I initially talked about. In concluding remark, I conclude with this excerpt from Clark. And it goes, history is not everything, but it is a starting point. History is a clock that people use to tell their political and cultural time of day. It is a compass they use to find themselves on the map of human geography. It tells them where they are, but more importantly, what they must be. The West not only colonized most of the world, they began to colonize information about the world and its people. In order to do this, they had to forget or pretend to forget all they had previously known about the Africans. With this, I bring to conclusion my presentation. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for three wonderful, very extensive presentations that not only cover a very broad analysis of sort of these situations of both cross-strait relations and, of course, relations between this region and the world and Africa in particular, but also each paper kind of also offers a particular set of proposals, a little bit different. Each proposal is a bit different. So I think there's a lot that one could discuss. So I think we can open up the event to a Q&A, both for those here as well as we have one attendee online. I think it's Richard. Hi, Richard. And for those online, I'm sorry that the first 30 to 40 minutes, the microphone was off because the microphone for the computer needed to be on. I thought that the microphone for the table would connect to it, but it didn't. But thankfully, Professor Otto's presentation had a lot of text, so I think they could follow along the beginning. But they have other questions, then we can also ask to revisit any pieces that were missed. So I'd first like to ask if anyone have any question for the presenters. Yes. And also please introduce yourself as well.
Thank you, Dr. Derek, and I'm a master degree student in the National University, and yes, yes. Personally, I'm doing research in Somaliland. Actually, maybe we see him in April in NCCU. Yeah. So thanks for encouragement of, research is going on, and yes, I have some questions. It's not really connect to the topic, but I'm very interested. So for both of you, for Dr. Ferdinand and for Michael and for Akchuku, and so I'm interested in that. Why? Because I know you're taking the MOFA scholarship, MOFA research funding, but why you choose to do study in Taiwan? Because you can choose in other countries, you can choose in China. So why Taiwan was a personal reason to Taiwan? And second question is, what's the what kind of problem or complication when you're doing research in Taiwan? Like what kind of problems when you interviewing with people or finding informants, some kind of that. And the third question is that yes, as you mentioned, that we need to have more extend the self-done policy. We need to have more connections and in exchange between Taiwan and Africa. So is there some opportunities or channels to encourage Taiwan scholars or researchers to have a academic visit to Africa institutes or university? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I chose Taiwan because of his peculiarity. I feel that Nigeria is a big power that Taiwan can relate with. Having a paradiplomatic relationship with Nigeria will be to the advantage of Taiwan. Nigeria has 36 states and a federal capital territory. In view of the fact that there is international politics behind the recognition of Taiwan, and Nigeria being a big power in Africa, relating with Nigeria will serve its own purpose. diplomatically and economically. Though there are Taiwanese companies in Nigeria, but they are not leveraging on that, to make Taiwan to become more acceptable, and like we have pointed out in our presentations here, point out the way China has used its economic power to buy almost all African states, like the last presenter talked about Eswatini, So I picked interest in Taiwan because I needed to see how Taiwan can use this paradiplomatic approach to begin to gain more recognition a country like Nigeria. Then you talked about the problem, in trying to, it's very, very difficult. Yeah, it was very difficult. One is the language. The language. I was not able to really get some of these Taiwanese people to express their view. However, when I went to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I was able to interact with few of them who could speak English and were able to also express their view. But largely those respondents that I got, were people who are in academics, that I was able to use them to get my responses to the questions I asked. So it was very difficult. I must be very honest. It was very difficult. What I had in mind coming to Taiwan is that I will be able to really get the views of the people. Those I interviewed, about 2-3 people were activists, and they can speak English. So I was able to also get their view, but I needed to get more of the Taiwanese views, in relation to Nigeria, because they always have this kind of misconception. Nigeria, when I interviewed the Minister of Foreign Affairs, one of them was pointing out a Nigerian who married a Taiwanese, and now they had issues and so on. And I said, no, that's an isolated case. We, just like the Taiwanese are very likable people. So also we have Nigerians who are very good. So all those kind of things, only when you visit a place, you can now begin to have a new orientation about the people and so on. So my coming to Taiwan has also given me an opportunity to know the way the Taiwanese are behaving. Different from the Chinese. We relate more with the Chinese. I know the Chinese in Nigeria. Their own behavior is quite different from the Taiwanese behavior. Yes, I must acknowledge that. Yes. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. For me, I have 3 reasons why I chose Taiwan. Number one is that my older brother, the oldest in the family, is a businessman. And so he has been trading with Taiwan in the late 70s and early 80s. So sometimes when he travels and comes back, we'll hear stories about Taiwan and all whatnot. So, and I myself, being the last born of the family, I started developing interest that this place that my older brother is always traveling to for trade. So that's number one. Number two is just like the last presenter made mention of paradiplomacy in subnational relation with subunits in Taiwan. In the state where I come from, the subnation where I come from, most people that are campaign with Taiwan. And in terms of technology, they said, I will make this place like Taiwan in terms of technological advancement. So most politicians that are campaign with Taiwan. So that was the comment. Okay, let me go and see this Taiwan that these guys always campaign when they are campaigning for election. And then the last reason, of course, I get paid for being a MUFA scholar. Thank you.
Okay. My reason for coming to Taiwan. My reason for coming to Taiwan is not quite different from theirs, but importantly, whenever you are conducting a research on a particular phenomenon, you will always have a better understanding and view of that when you are there and interacting. So I couldn't have understood Taiwan story better from Nigeria or from any other country other than in Taiwan. And then the ministry now invited me to come to Taiwan. The provision wasn't for me to study it anywhere. I must come to Taiwan. So that's why I'm here. And I must also confess that I've got a better view of Taiwan. You know, in Africa, just like so many other countries, they don't know the difference between China and Taiwan. If you say you are a Taiwanese, so China, Simba, Taiwan, that's China. You understand? So it's only on rare occasions that you tend to understand that there is a difference between a Taiwanese and a Chinese. And I am also thinking that in the wisdom of the ministry, insisting that you come to Taiwan to do the program will be to help you have better view and understanding of Taiwan, and by implication, more like connecting through what we may call track 2 diplomacy. You understand? Using this approach to reconnect with several countries, such that if I go back home, no doubt I'll have stories to tell about Taiwan, and then more persons to influence about Taiwan, and then Taiwanese approach to government and the rest of them. Then what kind of problem you encountered in Taiwan? Taiwanese are very accommodating, very nice people. The only problem you have is language. If you meet somebody who doesn't understand English, he or she will be quick to dismiss you. Not necessarily that he doesn't want to help, but that the medium of communication is already a problem, and which he wouldn't want to subscribe to. But once you get anyone that understands the language, you flow very well. So there's a particular last question you asked, whether there are opportunities to encourage Taiwanese to visit African institutes. Yes, there are. You see, what I discovered in Taiwan, and which also explains the problem they had until they arrive at the current state where they are, is that they used to be very contented people within their territory.
Very conservative.
Very conservative. They don't often reach out. You understand? It's recently that the understanding. I had a program sometime a few days ago where I was speaking with some Taiwanese students, and just like every other thing I used to encounter with some uninformed foreigners about Africa, some of them tend to think that Africa is just a country. You understand the thing? So one is that they must be disposed towards moving out. But from what I've also discovered is that some of them who want to move out always prioritize the global north. And when you talk about the global south, it just have to be within Asia. Africa is not in the picture. You understand? Otherwise, there are certain universities where you can also apply. But currently, we are having some institutions back home in Nigeria liaising with some institutions in Taiwan and having some exchange programs. It is currently happening both between Nigeria and Taiwan and between Nigeria and China. So that's about that. You're welcome.
Richard, are you there?
Hello. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for this initiative and for the presenters. It was very interesting. We learned a good deal out of their diverse presentations. I have 3 questions. The first one will be addressed to the last presenter. You highlighted that one reason African countries tend to favor China over Taiwan in their diplomatic relationship is that Taiwan's historical alignment with power and dominance exemplified by its support to the South African apartheid regime that you took as an example, and which I also noticed in the literature granted Taiwan kind of or Taiwanese inhabitants in South Africa the honorary white privileges, which was a status granted to European allies during the apartheid regime. So I can say that this observation reflects the reality when we observe it all over Africa. But also there are many papers written which show that effectively Taiwan has always sided by the powers, by the dominance. And one of those papers, at least it's a collection of papers published under the title Taiwan, the Land Colonialism Made. It was published by Arif Dirlik, Ya Chung Chuang Liao. So that publication also tried to describe Taiwan as a nation shaped by successive waves of colonialism. And the title itself shows it, the land colonialism made, so including the Dutch, Japanese, and Chinese rule. So given this history, colonialism seems deeply intertwined with Taiwan's identity, and we never saw Taiwan as a nation standing against colonialism, be it American, or at least we see for the Chinese colonialism. But at the end of the day, it doesn't reflect kind of a total anti-system, or pro-revolution stance. So my question would be, in your view, is it possible for Taiwan to exist without serving as a facilitator of imperialism, whether Western or Chinese? Because, how can Taiwan exist when, even the observation on the field, but also several publications confirm that, Taiwan exists as an extension of imperialism. So my second question is addressed to the presenter about the cross-strait tension between China and the US. From the title to the content and examples taken, the presentation focused effectively on the two powers using Taiwan as their object of dispute and competition. However, there was no reference to the people, and specifically to the indigenous people who are considered as custodians of the island, the Austronesians notably. So, and during my fieldwork in Taiwan last year, I had an opportunity to discuss with some of the indigenous people, and one of them, I had kind of a roundtable with different Taiwanese of different nationalities or different origins, I mean. So, one of the informant was a native Taiwanese, and he expressed himself about his position with regards, to this China-US position, and he remained a little bit conciliant towards both. He said both are bringing more strength to Taiwan. But when I gave the floor to Bunun informant, she said for them, they believe that, both, US and China, and also native Taiwanese who have brought the brand of Taiwan and the name itself of Taiwan are invaders. They believe that Taiwan can only exist as a nation if the Austronesian identity is at the center of the plight. Otherwise, what they just see now is just, same faces of the same coin, be it China or US or, the native Taiwanese through, the DPP or even, if the opponents. So this is what is your position when you hear such critiques who think that the main problem is not between the two powers or even the internal their internal collaborators, but actually they think that the Austronesian identity is downplayed as well as their territory, as they claim to be the indigenous and the main people who own the island. So this is, I don't want to monopolize the floor, but if there is time, I may ask a third one, but let me just, give the chance to others to ask questions, and I may come back later. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have two very detailed questions there. So if either Michael or Arlene want to talk first.
Thank you so much, Richard, for that wonderful question. It is not a joke that the situation Taiwan finds itself in. Taiwan is in a precarious situation. What Taiwan needs now is more of friends, allies. And that ally and alliances is not that easy to get. But when it comes to addressing your question directly, yes, it is feasible. Taiwan can do that. And Taiwan should try as much as possible to cleanse itself from the histories of the past. If you watch, it was intentional the way I ended my presentation, though I didn't have much time to go into details. Given, for example, China has a goodwill in Africa, coupled with its economic power. But along the line, when China started exhibiting itself and spreading its tentacles, and the feedback that is coming out from Africa is not palatable with regards to how Africans are being treated by China. In fact, COVID-19 exposed a lot, and the message was taken home in Africa because we are watching. We are in a global world. All things are there. And also, not derailing from addressing your question, let me also use the opportunity to bring to bear, to the fore, some of the experiences the early Africans that found themselves in Taiwan experienced. The isolation, this discrimination. Sometimes even when they are in MRTs, when they sit on the train, sometimes some Taiwanese stand up and move away from where they are standing, where they are sitting. And we take note of those things. But I will be honest, ever since I found myself in Taiwan, I've never experienced that. But I've had stories. There are African students in Taiwan who are studying here that during the course of my stay in Taiwan, I've interacted with, that have shared this lived experience in Taiwan. But at the same time, they're also of the view that attitude is changing, unlike how it used to be before. Okay, just barely 2 months ago, I returned from Japan. And while I was in Japan, I also got the same sentiment by most Africans that are in Taiwan, in Japan, how they are being treated initially, but now things are changing. So it's not peculiar to Taiwan. But Taiwan found itself in a precarious situation. My own advice is that, or my own suggestion is that, as long as Africa is concerned, China might be hobnobbing and romancing with African leadership. But the future would unveil a lot of things. It's not a caricature to say the great divide between the leaders, African leaders, and the people they are leading. But at the same time, I think Taiwan can play a pragmatic role in terms of how they engage in Africa, that arrogance that we experience from the West, it will be to the detriment of Taiwan if they should still emulate such without learning a thing or two from what has happened in the past. I know it's not going to be easy when it comes to issues of superpowers, China and America. Taiwan tilted towards America, trying to form a strong alliance for America being a superpower and also aligning themselves with the West. But at the same time, they should also know that Africa cannot be relegated. Africa comprises of 55 states. For example, during the course of a vote in the United Nations Resolution 1758, in 1971, Africa has numbers. And the new crop generation of Africans that are going to take up power in the nearest foreseeable future. Africans are not smiling now. The young generation are not smiling because things are not the way it's supposed to be. And there is a lot of distress everywhere. So I think it's a learning curve for Taiwan to take a cue from the pulse of Africa. Thank you. I think I will stop it here.
Richard, thank you for your questions and your concerns. Of course, one thing we need to understand during that voting period of expulsion of Chiang Kai-shek representatives from the UN, that was the era of decolonization movement in Africa. And Chiang Kai-shek's Taiwan represented a colonial power in the eyes of most Africans. So, and their fight against colonialism simply influenced whatever that happened at that time. And it's understandable why South Africa will be the only strong power in Africa that will be credited to be supporting Taiwan, as at that time, the reason being that South Africa itself was under apartheid regime. So it was under colonialism as well. So they couldn't be voting against a fellow power. But currently, it is like now a swap of the situation, that what China was to Taiwan before 1971 became what Taiwan is to China post 1971. Then on the question specifically addressed to me, perchance not making reference to Taiwanese, who are indeed the custodian. That's the Taiwanese in Taiwan, not the ones that see themselves as Chinese in Taiwan. You know, there are existing surveys in this regard, and we also have opinions of many individuals, including certain resonating Taiwanese identity and nationalism in the current time. But why we chose to look at politics, because politics is everything. Politics, in fact, if the whole of Taiwanese say they want to do away with both the US, do away with China, and all of that, not until the government subscribes to that. It is the position of the government that is taken to be the position of the people. But what we need to see that is also playing out in this identity building. Of course, if you watch the recent survey of Election Security Center, you will discover that over 80% or close to 80% of Taiwanese currently prefer to be seen as Taiwanese and not as Chinese, or as Chinese. Just very few subscribe to Chinese in Taiwan, and few subscribe to having a soft spot for both the Chinese and Taiwanese identity. What we need to understand in this situation is that there is a responsible for their problem. There we are Taiwanese. But in policy programs aimed at guiding Taiwanese national laws and all that intended to all their Japanese connection that they have and these identities. Simply at the platform to launch it wasn't necessary for the Taiwan or different identity. It was setting the colonial Taiwan while using it as a point of that.
I think Richard was also referring to indigenous Taiwanese, like non-Han Taiwanese, who sort of preceded even the Han Taiwanese settlers. But maybe we can circle back to Richard in a moment. But there was someone else here who had a question, so maybe I'll let them ask first, and then we'll circle back.
My name is Richard, also a mobile fellow based at the Center for Chinese Study at the National Library. Just one, not a question really, just to make a contribution to the discussions that the very brilliant scholars here have so eloquently, done. Somebody asked a question and he said, what can the Chinese, do? How can, the Taiwanese without the United States? And that is very critical questions because a relationship with the United States obviously defines the Taiwanese identity, at least outside and from the context of Africa, because Africans tend in the international relations to be more historically oriented, considering the part that each country had played during the liberation struggle, to know how they relate, the extent to which they relate to that country. I think that's what most of the presenters have actually alluded to here. However, over time, constructivists tell us that identities change. But with Taiwan, it has almost remained relatively the same, aligning with the West. But the reason is simple, because Taiwan also pursues its own national interests, which of course the third presenter did when he departed from the premise of realism. And the international interest, the survival of Taiwan, on the maintenance of the status quo. And the only strong nation backing that maintenance of the status quo is the United States. So whatever position the United States takes, Taiwan would not like to go against that very position, but to maintain it as a way of buying the support of the superpower and of course its allies that will ensure that it maintains the status quo. That's just the point I wanted to point out there. Thank you.
That's what I also stated when I was doing my presentation. You discover, like the recent survey about confidence on the defense of Taiwan, you only see Taiwanese having faith in the Taiwanese armed forces when there is increased U.S. alliance, when there is increased United. But what now appears to be in a critical position moving forward, particularly under nobody knows what will be the fate of Taiwan when President Trump returns for the second tenure. But if he is a man who is bent on doing what he says, which he demonstrated in the first term, he also declared that henceforth Taiwan will start to pay for its protection, that it will no longer extend protection against China at no cost. So this is a critical issue. And if you monitor, just like the last speaker said, Taiwan tends to move always towards the United States. It's understandable because right from the time of the Chinese Civil War, and then in the contestation resulting in determination of the fate of modern China, they had, Chiang Kai-shek in particular, had always wanted a civilization formed along Western-influenced civilization style, contrary to Mao Zedong and the CCP. So it's understandable why some of these things take place, and but unfortunately, the rest of us in Africa have always had our concerns with these big powers. And that is also what we're advocating Taiwan should be conscious of. Essentially, people have always said that it is not likely that China and Taiwan will enter into a war. But I will say that if there will be war between China and Taiwan, that war will be influenced by the United States.
Thank you. Just my own, just to link it up with what I presented. The politics of recognition of Taiwan at the international level is very important for us to understand it. And that is why my argument is that Taiwan needs to free itself from that kind of conservative approach to diplomacy. Well, the number of states or countries in Caribbean that Taiwan are having diplomatic relations with are not the ones that can vote in for Taiwan, assuming the issues are raised in the UN for its recognition or for its independence or its admission into the UN into the UN as a body. And that is the reason why, like my other presenter pointed out, Africa has a large voting bloc in the UN. And if you isolate yourself and relating with Eswatini that has no diplomatic muscle to support your cause, then of course Taiwan will continue to lament. I pointed out in my presentation about all the paradiplomatic relationship that Taiwan is having is with the United States. They have not been able to utilize that approach to have a diplomatic relation with most other states in the world. And that is what it should be leveraging on now, and not just because it's not possible for overnight for Taiwan to become an independent state. It's not possible. It's a political issue. And that is why it must be able to spread its relationship with these subnational units. Once you're able to spread it, then of course, gradually, let me just quickly before I stop. Abuja, for instance, is the capital of Nigeria. All the state governors come to Abuja for one thing or the other. Now, if Taiwan subnational units begin to relate with those subnational entities, then they will put pressure on Nigerian government indirectly. No matter the pressure that China will be putting on Nigeria, they will know that, yes, this state, for instance, a state like Lagos, which is the commercial center of Nigeria, is having good relationship with Taipei, having good relationship with Kaohsiung, and so on. It will be very difficult for Nigerian government to overlook such a relationship with Taiwan. Irrespective, because that is what China has done, using the provinces to penetrate into the countries and so on. So, yeah.
Well,
And I think he did justice to what I was about to say. But I just have one or two things to add in response to Richard's question. And my view is that in as much as we are looking at Taiwan, the way it is romancing and hobnobbing with the West, like I initially said ab initio, that Taiwan should be pragmatic in how it handles its affairs and also its engagement in Africa. It also calls to mind this concept of national interest. In as much as Taiwan is also highly dependent on America, Taiwan should be careful in not being the lapdog of America, of the West. And that is where the element of pragmatism comes in. Taiwan should know what its interest, where its interest lies on, and also be very, very careful how it pursues that national interest. In international arena, national interest always overrides whatever, even friendship, in international community, in global politics. So, in as much as Taiwan is highly dependent on America, it will never lose sight of that, of national interest. Remember that America has already played a card before. In 1979. And also, Taiwan should also learn a thing or two from what is happening in Somaliland. There was a conference that I attended here where the representative of Somaliland was present. There are some comments that he dropped that when they were going for recognition, they approached Kenya and Kenya was all welcoming. But at the time, America, that has a de facto friendship with them, we are the one that went back doors to advise Kenya not to recognize Somaliland. And the Somaliland representative in Taipei here was like, we thought we were with America. All of a sudden, what happened? Meaning that America can sell you behind your back. But you won't blame America, so to speak. It's all about international interest. In as much as they can promise to protect you, guide you, but you yourself should not lose sight of what your own national interest is. For example, but the fact that I'm your protector does not mean that I should ask you to put your hand in fire and that fire is burning and you have to put your hand in fire, a fire that is burning. No, you got to be pragmatic and be careful in your engagement and your relation, and don't be a lapdog. It doesn't cost you much by saying, okay, we had you. Let's look into it and see how we handle this issue. You see? Then also, let's be honest, the situation that Taiwan finds itself is complicated. Let's not make any mistake about that. But Taiwan should learn how to swim. When it comes to issues of defense, Taiwan should strive to stay away from over-reliance on America, in America. For example, within the campuses that I used to engage and interact with most young Taiwanese, the only thing that comes to their mind is, I don't want war, I don't want war, I don't want war. This is the only thing that preoccupies their mind. Then you begin to ask yourself, where is the patriotism? Nobody begs for war. Nobody begs for war. Nobody wants war. But there comes a time in a nation's life that you got to be prepared. You got to be, see what you can do. Though I don't want to dabble into the internal politics of KMT-DPP of Taiwan. That is not mine to go into. Because I've asked some questions, why are some young Taiwanese refusing to join the army? And there are so many things that the incentives is not high, it's not encouraging to, it's not paying more to be in the army. And in most times, sometimes a precarious situation calls for a desperate measure. And that desperate measure also has to do with incentivizing the military in such a way that it will be lucrative for young Taiwanese to join. Though in the course of my field work here, I've also come to understand the game of the military in Taiwan, the reason why it is somehow underfunded, which I'm not going to go into much details, but what I can only say is that Taiwan should be quite pragmatic. I keep mentioning that word, pragmatism. Taiwan should be careful in how it conducts its affairs. And the one that interests me most is Africa, because I'm an African. And in as much as we are here and the game that has been played in the global arena, which we are also bearing the brunt of it in Africa, so to speak. And we're not going to delve into the ills of the West in Africa. Even the China that we thought that we are, China that is coming, that China comes as a partner, as the co-sufferers who has been subjugated by the colonial masters. Like an African proverb I always say, the sound of a munching bitter cola does not taste. The taste is different from how it sounds when it's being munched. So complete. Thank you.
The issue he raised is also quite clear and germane. That's why we talked about the geographical location of Taiwan. Remember, during the Korean War, the US declared Taiwan as the Pacific key, a very critical instrument that should not be allowed to fall into communist control. And it is to tell you, like rightly identified, and which we have been saying, that even if Taiwan wants to have independence, for instance, I tell you, the US will be the first to say no. Not necessarily for any other thing, but because of its own national interest. And what's that interest? Taiwan presents a perfect situation for playing the Indo-Pacific game, not just with China, but for any other rising power in Asia, including India. So today we are discussing China. Tomorrow it could be Japan. Next tomorrow it could be India. And Taiwan is well situated to play this game. So US will never like to lose it. And that is why, even if China wants to invade here by force, it will be very difficult for it to win. Even though it is looking towards, it's watching Russia and Ukraine, watching it very closely. And they are plotting the mistakes made, such that assuming China will want to invade Taiwan today, it will calculate a military operation that will take less than 24 hours to get. But it's not going to be easy. Because the same way they are plotting that game is the same way the other vested interests are plotting the game. I was in a program where a Japanese presented. I was looking at the US-Japan connection, and he rightly argued that yes, if China should invade Taiwan today, Japan will join to save, to protect Taiwan only if US commits itself. But if the US fails to commit, then Japan will not intervene. And if US does not commit itself, then it will send a signal to Japan and to him. Without Japan, US cannot also be called a world power. That it is the alliance of US and Japan that also incentivizes the American strength. So Taiwan is simply an unfortunate pawn in the global geopolitical game. And navigating it, that's why we are saying that it is better to trade cautiously, because sometimes if you speak with many Taiwanese, particularly these indigenous people, their greatest enemy is China. You understand? But in a geopolitical calculation, China is not necessarily the critical enemy. The only problem of China, which is what it is suffering terribly, is its inability to have good neighborliness with the surrounding countries, Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and the rest of them. And that's why if it invades Taiwan, that is where it will have greater problem. Because others will also find opportunity to say, okay, we need to support it this way, so that we also curb the rising influence of this one that is also a threat to our own sovereignty. So that's the unfortunate situation of Taiwan. Thank you.
So point out.
We're very close on time here, but I also wanted to have a chance to also maybe ask a question as well. Because I mean, I think a lot of the discussion in the Q&A has sort of gone to the question of the dangers of Taiwan being a pawn in sort of a larger. I think that seems to be a common theme there. Everyone has kind of come to kind of a, I wouldn't say consensus, but a parallel. Everyone's sort of going that same direction. So then so I guess from the perspective of Taiwan, because a lot of the presentations are about, especially the first presentation is about, what Taiwan can do to sort of increase its diplomatic engagement and embeddedness in the world, such as, this such paradiplomacy. But that's from the Taiwan perspective, of course, and a lot of the efforts in Taiwan are about being seen, right? Taiwan wants to be seen, wants to be known, wants to bring people to Taiwan, to see how But the question then becomes, well, then what are the interests of, and of course, the interests of Nigeria may be very different from the interests of South Africa. Every country is different. I mean, Namibia is also very different. What are the interests of African countries to engage with Taiwan at all? I mean, this is just a hypothetical question. Like, the interests for Taiwan are kind of obvious: diplomatic connections, a voice, visibility. But for whether it's countries or even the subnational units, what motivations are there? If this is sort of seen as like a game of pawns, so to speak, what motivations are there to get involved in it without also getting involved in that U.S., China, Taiwan? So this is sort of an open question. So given what you said about the dangers of Taiwan in great power politics, what are the dangers or opportunities for African countries vis-a-vis that in engaging with Taiwan? Yeah.
For me, I would say outside the spheres of America, China, power game surrounding Taiwan, one thing that we know, most people know in Africa, more especially Nigeria, where I come from, when you mention Taiwan, The second thing that comes is technology. How Taiwan was able to turn around their situations in such a way that they are known in terms of their capabilities, technology-wise, and economy, how they build the economy. And in dealing with Nigeria and other subnationals, for me, I think African nation states would want to engage with Taiwan as equals, unlike how most African countries engage with China or engage with America. So there is a shared value between them in the sense that with what Taiwan is experiencing in the hands of its existence is also what Africa has also experienced. Even though we are not yet out from the loop, we are still grappling with imperialism, neocolonialism. But at the same time, the interest of African states to engage with Taiwan is that we have one or two things to exchange. One, you have the technology, you have the might, good economy that you build, and also the darling of the world, which is TSMC, the chip of the future. And most African, it's on record that Africa has the youngest population in the world. And one thing that is so peculiar to young people is technology. For example, the way I handle technology is different from how people who are younger than me can handle technology. And they are quite in tune with it. You see? So, and I think it's something that is valuable that can unite Africa and Taiwan outside US, China, palavras, so to speak, to my own knowledge.
Yeah, just he has answered most of the question, but let me add that the economic reason is very, very vital. Recently, the reports released showed that Taiwan is the 14th largest economy in the world in terms of GDP, which of course, any of the states, any of the subnational units in Nigeria having to relate with Taiwan would be of immense benefit. And in fact, that was one of the things that motivated me. A state like Lagos State is densely populated, a huge market, which of course Taiwan can leverage on in relating with Lagos, either Taipei, Kaohsiung, all those areas, all those municipalities in Taiwan, can relate with them and begin to have good economic relationship, with those subnational units. And that will translate to also having a good relationship with Nigeria and Taiwan. Because having, like I mentioned in my presentation, when the economic processing zone was opened in Calabar, Taiwan quickly came and opened a consulate there. But unfortunately, they were not able to utilize that opportunity, partly because that particular project, was not very viable and they closed up. But we have other states in Nigeria that are economically buoyant. Taiwan does not have resources. The only resources they have is technology. And in Nigeria, they have so many states that are endowed with natural resources that Taiwan can leverage on. Taiwan depends on Nigerian agriculture, settlement and so on, and which, of course, the statistics shows now that the trade investment, in terms of export between Nigeria and Taiwan, as last year has improved about 500 million US dollars. At a point, it went down, 2001 and so on, but it has picked up again. And in fact, they celebrated 33 years anniversary of Nigeria-Taiwan trade relationship. The Taipei trade office in Nigeria, they celebrated 33 years. And they were able to point out the prospect. So I think Taiwan should be able to leverage on that. And like other of my speakers have pointed out, the conservative nature of Taiwan society. It will not actually help them. It will not help them in this kind of international politics that is being played. China is playing that politics very, very well, and it's favoring. It's not China is a very crooked country. We Africans know, but they're able to, understand the African setting, and they use their companies. Nigeria, for instance, the railway construction in Nigeria is built by a Chinese company. So China has penetrated. So Taiwan should also play that same economic game, and that will be of interest to Taiwan and also to Nigeria.
Okay. What will be the interest of African countries to engage with Taiwan? There is a saying that if Europe and America, otherwise the West, are the past, and Asia is the present, Africa is the future. In the world of artificial intelligence, AI, Internet of Things, 5G, now some moving to 6G, and then industrial automation, we cannot rule out the place of microchip semiconductor. The problem with some thinking in terms of, essentially the world has become an interdependent global system. There is no Ireland in terms of economic interests. But the problem with thinking of some countries is that, especially towards Africa, is that each time Africa is mentioned, what they are looking towards is giving foreign aid, giving grants, giving loan, and then each time there is this friendship movement, this person is coming for what I have, not necessarily looking at what the other person have. And I think that was where China beat the US and beat the rest of them from 2016 at the time of Donald Trump. When Obama came, Obama talked about now relating with Africans as equal partners, no longer as master-slave or colonial colony, but now relating with Africans as partners. But we didn't see, Africa didn't see such a relationship. In fact, under him, Africa witnessed the worst. That was the time Africa's best head of state was lowered. That was the only investment Obama brought to Africa, was to have for us a military command in Niger from where they continue to market international and fund international terrorism. Now, one critical issue why what African countries will be needing from, what they need is not foreign aid. What they need is not loans or grants. What they need is partnership. And that was what China came with. China came with this rhetoric of win-win cooperation, South-South relations, presented itself as a global South country. And then, so we have similar historical experience, similar colonial experience. Therefore, I have come to you not as a master servant. After all, I'm not a master. Leveraging this kind of rhetoric and then gaining very deep influence, like every other imperialist power, because I don't blame them. I only blame the kind of crop of politicians we produce in Africa as leaders. And where Taiwan should be looking to us, and what Africans will be needing Taiwan in the future, will be in the area of this industrial automation, because it cannot continue to be the way it is. Unfortunately, if this provision is not made, even on the part of Taiwan, it will lose very huge market. Currently, SMIC, which is China's similar TSMC, is trying to improve its advanced semiconductor manufacturing, especially currently that Taiwan has ceased from manufacturing For Hawaii, for instance, it knows the amount of money it is losing. And in order not to be shut out in playing the advanced industrial automation game, all these people will continue to improve. It's just a matter of time. Therefore, technically, it has lost the Chinese market and lost the African market and can only be looking for ways to reconnect, not to give aid, but as partners. So what countries in Africa are looking for are partnership that will benefit both Taiwan and then Africa, and not any of them in particular.
It's a nice, satisfying experience. Thank you. But I have said that back again, strategies, and it's like a so I assume that yeah. I know. I do. I do. And then when I'll check if I need it again. But there's a lot of. Because like, wonder if they ask something. Because you said that you've gone to these events. Like Josh, and I was like Nikki Elliott. Yes. And I'm just like, what kind of like you make? Because it seems like to me it just seems really obscure. It's like I don't know if they actually have like a very consistent program like what they're actually learning now. One of the things that I don't know what they say. I don't know what if you know this. What is annoying is I don't like it. I'm saying. It's like look. Something that's not really what does that Michael actually? Oh, it's fine. Okay. Well, we just take the base of the signature. Oh, hold on a second. We still need a signature. Michael, let's just yours right here. This is mine. Use sign. Still need to sign it.
these times. Some of it's bureaucratic, comes I don't know. Okay. Yeah.
Well, that's a great answer.
I think it's okay. If I need any other signature, I'll
It's okay.
change that.
Yeah, so that's it. And
I think the 20 is 20. So, okay. Right.
say
Yeah. I mean, so the interesting thing about this conference is that originally it was going to be held here. Philip Dale was supposed to bring people that had some achievement, had money had to spend on a farming students and dollars. So he was going to go to Gina, forgot about it. Not the end of the story yet. At the same time, the opening they're only given that, and it was one of the organized conferences last year. He that is in GMed University. GMed is involved in person China. He was one of the who did it for conference. So he wanted to do an act like this conference. The same weekend as this conference. And so what happened is when they found out that I was going to come the same week, and they had not done anything, why don't we just combine it into one conference? So we haven't agreed because we're still trying to work out. But there's a possibility of conversation April in June. But there's a good news to that. The problem was I thought you were going to be here. But then and our budget research group was not enough to international flights. But Philip said that he had a budget, and so we do invite people from Nigeria. We actually got money to bring people in. Which means we actually have money to bring. I don't know how much it's we're still it's an advantage of my out.
no.
Otherwise, it'd be like half online, which is not as good. So
That's not like physical. This online can become like I don't know. Five is not there.
no, I think it's good. I think it's good for allowing people to participate who would not be. Like Richard, I know Richard had a question. I was glad for Richard to participate because Richard had a problem with another. So I'm trying to bring it back into the fold. So
Yeah, I remember you too.
yeah, so I mean, yeah, but I had like 20 people sign up, 10 people sign up, and no one signed up.
So it was only Richard that was from
Only Richard. There were 2 other people.
those other people are
No, one of them he's security, but he worked with the Germain. He was actually a Germain student.
okay.
He's now, I think he's also on a fellowship.
Wait, is it the guy who made that time?
No, he's
The Jewish guy that was telling us.
no. That's Felix. The other guy's secretary. Then Ina, who's a modest. Unfortunately, the Bible wasn't learned. But this is the first part of the mission. Yeah.
That's really.
Oh, you're all going to say that. Anyway, thank you for coming down.
Thank you so much. Look, it's only during the Q&A that states are drawing exposed.
Yeah.
Because the time instead of it's only during question that what exchange are explored.
Yeah, no, the Q&A is really interesting.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, like the more open and kind of exchange.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you were saying with Lily.
Oh, I forgot.
Oh, Lily, totally.
I haven't seen. Thank you.
Oh. Oh, it's a gold card.
Yes.
Okay.
That's just another one.
Yeah, it's the higher standard. Really? So when you said Lily and right?
No, there's another American woman. She married here. She married a Taiwanese. Or she came here in 60.
Oh, I think that.
Linda.
Linda, there you go. Yeah, she's, yeah, oh, you met her.
Linda, that's first I compare her with her. So then we can-
Yeah, I mean, that's my question. That just, like I mentioned, like, MOPA invites people, like I just met, Richard. Yeah. But MOPA doesn't really advertise the joy event. And so so for example, like, there's only like so few people in Taiwan who do research on Africa. And yet somehow, like,